from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
The big story of the day is Labour saying up to 120,000 people have died in the last year on NHS waiting lists. Is this all the fault of the government, or would many of them have died anyway? We'll debate that. Where to put all these young men crossing the English Channel? Well, now, in Huddersfield, students are being kicked out of halls of residence. We'll go live to Huddersfield. And joining me on Talking Pints, well, he was a banker, he was a politician, a renowned Thatcherite and right-winger. Sir Gerald Howarth will join me on Talking Pints. But before all of that, let's get the news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Nigel, thank you very much and good evening. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. Around 121,000 patients died while waiting for NHS treatment in England last year. That's according to figures obtained by Labour gathered from NHS trusts. It suggests 7.6 million people were still on waiting lists at the end of June, up from 7.5 million in May. The government says cutting waiting lists is one of its key priorities. Junior doctors and consultants will be taking joint strike action in England for the first time across September and October. They'll walk out for 4 days in their long-running disputes over pay. The British Medical Association says consultants will strike on September 19th and 20th, with junior doctors also walking out on September the 20th, followed by strikes on the 21st and 22nd. Both consultants and junior doctors will strike again on October 2nd, 3rd and 4th. Emergency care will continue to be provided. Schools in England must immediately shut buildings made with a type of concrete that's prone to collapse until safety measures are in place. Some schools will have to relocate children to other teaching spaces. More than 100 schools are being contacted before the start of the new term. The Association of School and College Leaders claims the government knew about the dangers in 2018 and has been too slow to respond. But Education Secretary Gillian Keegan says the government is keeping on top of doing all it can to deal with the issue.
If it's in a place that is causing concern, sometimes it can be in a part of the building that's, doesn't have children in, etc. So we have been going in great detail, and we're taking a very cautious approach, much more involved than we would usually be, because the responsible building owners have their own plans, but we are on top of that. The department is playing a bigger role to try and make sure that we just support those schools that have RAC and mitigate and minimise the disruption to children as soon as possible.
Grant Shapps has been appointed as the new Defence Secretary following the resignation of Ben Wallace. After 4 years in the job, he says he wants to explore different opportunities and spend more time with his family. In his resignation letter, Mr Wallace says the Ministry of Defence is back on the path to being once again world-class. Education Minister Claire Coutinho takes over as Energy and Net Zero Secretary, replacing Shapps. And finally, police officers will be automatically dismissed if they're found guilty of misconduct under the new government plans. Senior officers will have more powers to sack rogue staff and be able to dismiss those who fail vetting checks. The government says the changes could be implemented as soon as next spring. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying Play GB News. Now it's back to Nigel.
Good evening. Well, it's always been a huge issue in British politics. It is, of course, the National Health Service, which matters to each and every single one of us. And there can be no doubt that over the last couple of years, there have been increasing doubts about the system and the way in which it works. And rising waiting lists, I would suggest, are virtually at the top of that queue. Now, the PM, Rishi Sunak, one of his key 5 pledges is to reduce NHS waiting lists. But that's not going too well, because there are currently 7.6 million people who are waiting for some form of NHS procedure. Now, the Labour Party, perfectly cleverly, putting in freedom of information requests, have released today that 121,000 people have died whilst they were on the NHS waiting lists and not treated within the specified time of 18 weeks. Politically, very clever. Let's listen to senior Labour politician Emily Thornberry.
The NHS Constitution says that you have a right to see a doctor within 18 weeks, and that isn't happening. And people are dying in pain and fear, hoping that there's going to be help coming, and that help doesn't come. Now, the NHS was not behaving like this when there was a Labour government. I'm sorry to say this, but it is the truth. Over the last 13 years, we have seen the way in which the NHS has been diminished under this Conservative government, and they have no plan for doing anything about it.
Well, forgive me for having a touch of déjà vu, but it begins to feel a bit like 1997. Yes, of course, the Tories have been in for 18 years. Yes, of course, there was back to basics and all the sleaze. But actually, I think the biggest factor that got Blair that massive majority back in 97 was that people trusted Labour far more to run the NHS than they did the Conservative Party. And that's the game that Labour are playing right now. Are they sincere in what they say? Is it fair to put this death toll on waiting times, on the Conservative Party? But above all, would Labour do better? Please give me your thoughts. Farage@gbnews.com. Now, I'm joined by Roy Lilly, former NHS Trust Chairman. Roy, there is no doubt that these continual increases in NHS waiting times for procedures, some very small, some very big, it's a major source of public concern, isn't it?
Oh, it is. There's no question about it. And it's why the Prime Minister's made it one of his 5 priorities. And good luck with that, because every time he gets... I mean, if we think about it, recently, the NHS, there was a kind of window at the beginning of this year where the NHS got stuck in and they reduced the 2-year waits to almost nothing. So they can churn it out if they're given a chance. But of course, the problem we've got now are the strikes, and we've heard more strikes are going to be coordinated.
Well, I was keen to get that because, I mean, BMA talking this afternoon, for the first time ever in the history of the NHS, it'll be the junior doctors and consultants going on strikes and slow down. What do you make of that?
Well, I don't want to downplay it. Don't misunderstand what I'm going to say. But the NHS is now pretty good at handling these strikes. So what will happen, I think, is, well, I'm assuming the BMA will allow this kind of Christmas Day type cover for the blue light for the front door, for ITU, and some derogations allowing docs to come in under specific circumstances. So, I mean, it will, there's no question about it, the whole of the back end of the NHS will come to a grinding halt. And that's where the implication is for waiting lists. Now, of course, you know, we think people are waiting, well, they'll be all right, they'll wait a bit longer. Actually, that isn't true. I mean, we've seen the numbers that Labour have dug up today. Yeah. We really do have to look a bit closer to them. It was 25% of the Trust replied. They extrapolated the rest of the numbers, which is fair enough. Yeah. But, of course, if you're on the waiting list for a bunion and you die because you're 96, you haven't died of your bunion. So I
was struck by that. There was another figure that was released today that 340,000 of people who died in Britain last year, and that's 60% of those who died, had a medical condition. Well, I mean, that's hardly surprising, is it?
You could say, you know, a man with a red tie died today, he had a medical condition. Yeah. We've all got, you know. Yeah. So I think we've got to be careful.
So our Labour, I mean, getting back to Emily Thornberry, and Wes Streeting was out there, but Emily Thornberry was the most senior Labour politician out there today. And you can see the political angle that she's taking. As I say, it is a repeat of the 97 election.
I go back to when Robin Cook was Labour's Shadow Secretary of State. And at the time, I was the vice chairman of the Confed, which is like the trade organisation for the hospitals. And there was an election coming, and, you know, we wanted to kind of be fair and brief everybody. And I remember going to see him in his chaotic office in Westminster and say, you know, would you like a briefing from the Confed, you know? And he said, no, thanks. We're just going to let the Tories make a mess of it and pick holes in what they're doing. And that's sort of
Is that really what he said?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, in terms of cynicism, it rates at about 100%. But in terms of political practicality...
Well, I mean, you're a politician. You know exactly. I mean, let's not pretend you don't know what's going on here. Look, the nub of this is... Labour are not going to be able to do anything about it either. The situation is this.
So are you suggesting it would not be better under Labour?
I think it will be... Well, I think the instinct might be to put more money in, and I think the instinct would be to have a bit of a reorganisation, which is always a bad thing. I mean, we don't need more reorganisations, but we're likely to get one. And they've got this idea that they're going to fund more doctors and nurses by taxing non-doms. Well, any non-doms that's got half their wits about them will be long gone before there's a Labour government. So I don't think that's going to work very well. But look, what's happened here, Nigel, is that it goes back a long way. Following the world banking crisis, we had 10 years of pretty much flatline funding. Under 2% for the NHS for 8 years.
Under 2% rises?
Yes, under 2% increases every year. Yeah. It needs 4% just to keep its head above water. We didn't recruit enough nurses, recruit enough doctors, buy enough kit, innovate enough, repair enough, you know, build enough, whatever. And so we came into COVID then. And at that time, waiting lists were at 4.5 million. And we had 40,000 vacancies in nurses. We all forget that. Then along came COVID, all bets are off, the government chucks money everywhere, spaffs most of it, everybody somehow or other muddles through, and now we come out the other side with people who didn't go to the NHS during COVID for all sorts of reasons. We got 7.5 million now, I think it's closer to 8. And of course the other thing is this, the strikes have knocked nearly 900,000 people off the waiting list. So they've come off because they've missed their turn because the NHS has been on strike, and they've got to go back. Now, the chaos that caused is almost indescribable for hospitals because it's a huge manual thing. Somehow or other...
Right, how can it be right? I mean, I get junior doctors work long hours, and it's a very long apprenticeship in many cases, and they're not very highly paid, although when they get to the end of it, they are. These consultants that are going to go on, you know, short hours, semi-strikes, however you... I mean, half of them are working in Harley Street in their free time. How can we have any sympathy with them at all?
I think they've failed to read the room.
OK, good. Really. Well, please, I haven't missed this one then. Yeah.
No, I think they've messed it up. And to be honest, I don't have any sympathy. I mean, I've sort of got the nurses' strike. I sort of got the junior doctor strike.
Although not 35%.
No, but I think, to be honest, that was mismanaged comms, because what they were doing, they were saying the value of our wage packet has gone down by 35% because of inflation and the traction has been lost. So, I mean, they're not stupid. The ones that I've spoken to, they realise they're not going to get 35%. What they'll do is they'll get a deal over 3 years and they'll push the big chunk of money for the third year into Labour when there's a Labour government, if you want to talk about cynical politics, but that's what's going to happen. But, I mean, no, I mean, I can't look a consultant in the eye that's, even if they're not doing private work, they're between 80 to 100 grand a year. They're highly educated people in doing the jobs they love and want. How they can turn their backs on people in this way and say, oh, it's the government that's made me do it. It's not. The only person that makes them do it is the person that looks at them in the mirror when they clean their teeth in the morning. They make those decisions.
I think they're going to be around popular. So, Roy, we know long waiting lists. There are some people that would die that ought to get treatment. But Labour are over-egging this, aren't they?
I think, well, they certainly, from what Emily Thornberry said today, I think that's misleading, actually, what she said, by associating deaths with waiting. There was no correlation in that data. I'm not saying that there isn't a correlation, and I'm not saying that delayed care is dangerous care and people will die waiting, but these numbers are entirely spurious. But as far as Labour is concerned, I mean, they don't have a plan, do they? They don't say, OK, on day one, we're going to do this, and this, going to sort out that and that. And the reason is, Nigel, they can't do that because all of the problems the NHS have got are very long range. Now, if you look at the workforce plan, actually, which was published a couple of months ago, it's a 15-year recovery programme. Wow. Because it takes so long to train a doctor
which is three parliaments.
Exactly. And do you think it's really going to be, if we talk about cynical politics, is it going to be funded in the second and third parliament? I don't think so. We'll have a new workforce plan by then.
Roy Denny, with all your deep experience and passion for this subject, it is, I have to say, a little bit disappointing to hear your pessimism about the future.
Well, listen, you know, I'm the flag waver for the NHS. We've known each other for a long time. I've been true and faithful to it, and I do believe in socialised medicine, and I do think it's a great system. But I am truly worried for the future. I think, a lot of staff are very hacked off, and once you lose morale, you start to lose, you take your eye off the ball. I think the recovery programme is going to be a long time. I do think if we can get a clear period of sensible funding, and I'm not talking about, double the funding and what have you, 4.5%, something like that per annum, if we can get a clear run and the politicians sort these blooming strikes out, then I think we'll see a much quicker recovery than we all expect.
Well, provided we spend the money wisely, I guess that's the one proviso I would have on this.
Well, it's fair enough. I mean, it's a huge financial commitment, and I'm not saying, there's never waste, there's waste everywhere. But, I mean, broadly speaking, we get a pretty good bang for our bucks, I think, with the NHS. Okay. And a lot of people talk about private medicine, but you can take your insurance policy subscriptions out of your left-hand pocket and you can take your taxes out of your right-hand pocket. It's still your trousers. You're still going to pay.
We've still got to pay. Roy Denny, as ever, superb. Thank you very much indeed. Looking forward to your comments on whether you think at home Labour would do better. In a moment, students being kicked out of halls of residence for all these young men crossing the English Channel. Where will it all end?
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Well, whenever the weather is decent, the young men cross the English Channel. Now, it's been a pretty rotten summer. Another 300 came on Wednesday, none came yesterday. It's all down to the weather. And that's why we're 20% down. It's still 20,000 people so far, but we're 20% down on last year, and I believe it is simply because of the weather. But the problem, or where to put everybody, just gets bigger and bigger, whether it's former RAF bases with distinguished World War II records, whether it's barges in the dock at Portland, which turn out, of course, later on to be unfit for use, whether it's hotels, over 300 of them, filled up around the country. But now, one I hadn't seen before. Now, this is the case of a university student halls of residence, and one that had been recently redecked, and it was described as a luxury accommodation for students. And apparently, in Huddersfield, they're going to get booted out for young men that have recently crossed the Channel, and there is some considerable local anger. I'll hand it over to Anna Riley, GB News' Yorkshire and Humber reporter. Anna.
Good evening, Nigel. Yes, 168 students were due to come to this accommodation behind us, HD1 it's called, in just a matter of a few weeks' time, due to start the university term again in September. But last minute, they were notified that the Home Office are actually going to use this accommodation to house asylum seekers. 405 is what the accommodation can hold up to, so 405 rooms. For asylum seekers coming over on the boats. Of course, that's left students sort of scrambling for last-minute accommodation. The provider of the accommodation said that they are doing the best that they can to help house the students, and the Home Office as well have said that they have been upfront about the unprecedented pressure being put on the asylum seeker, brought about by a significant increase in dangerous and illegal journeys into the country. And they say that they continue to work across government and local authorities to identify a range of accommodation options, and that the government remains committed to engaging with local authorities and key stakeholders as part of this process. So that's what the Home Office have said. I went out earlier into Huddersfield to ask people their views on this accommodation being used for asylum seekers instead of students as planned, and this is what they had to say.
People who live near, then that would be an issue for them because they could find alternatives, but it would be better if they prioritize people who live further away so they could attend university without an issue.
I think they should try and accommodate them somewhere else, so they don't have to be so close to the university, so university students can live here.
Well, I think, obviously you need somewhere for the asylum seekers. I think it's awkward a little bit for the students that are already in situ, but there is a lot of student accommodation around, it seems, and I think overall they shouldn't have too much trouble in the long run getting people good accommodation for students.
So that's what people in the city centre have been saying, but I'm joined now by Sajid Ali and his daughter. He lives with his family just right opposite the HD1 building behind us, and it was only when I came to speak to you earlier that you actually found out that this accommodation was now going to be used for asylum seekers. You'd had no prior notice from Prestige Living or from the Home Office or local council?
Nothing, no idea what was going on. As far as I was aware, it was going to be student accommodation again. But I'm really disappointed that they didn't notify anyone, as this road has also families as well as vulnerable elderly people that live here. And we don't know what type of people they're going to move in here. We don't know if they're going to be families. We don't know if it's only going to be men, because the college is just a stone's throw away, and lots of children go to the college, and they're very vulnerable. So if they're going to be men, we don't know if they're men, drug dealers, rapists, soldiers. We don't know what guys they've come across the boats in.
It does tend to be predominantly men, like you've mentioned. And how does that make you feel, knowing that your family are going to be nearby?
I'm very appalled, I'm very angry, to be honest with you. The council should have notified the residents at least. I mean, we only live across the road. It would have been hard for them to send us some letters, some notification, what's going to happen. Or they could have given us an option. Are you happy with such a thing happening with the accommodation across the road? They could have put it to a vote. They could have actually moved them to the edge of Huddersfield, where there's a lot of open, large buildings that could have been utilised or demolished for housing.
Yeah, as it is a 4-minute walk to the university from here, so close to the city centre. What would you say to people, though? We played out views from the public earlier who said, well, these people have to go somewhere, you know, students can find other accommodation.
Well, the students are going to eventually get their distinctions, and they're going to run the country. These asylum seekers aren't going to do that. You don't even know what they're going to do. They might not work for the next 10, 15 years. They might be burgling you for the next 10, 15 years, because you don't know who's actually come over. They could come over with no identification, nothing, no government documents. And some of them, yeah, they're okay, but not all of them, because you could see them around town begging for money, and then you see them jumping in their fancy cars and driving off. And it's been going on for a number of years, this.
Thank you for your views there, Sajid. Really appreciate that. So that's the view from people in Huddersfield city centre, and a concerned local resident with his family, a bit nervous about that announcement that he's just found out from me this afternoon, that asylum seekers are due to move opposite at this HD1 building.
Anna Riley, thank you very much indeed. And what Sajid was saying there is how people feel all over the country. They are naturally nervous about large groups of young men being moved into whatever accommodation it is. As he said, we've no idea who they are. We've no idea whether they've been involved in the Syrian war. We've no idea whether some of them are allied to ISIS. We've no idea how many genuinely would qualify in traditional terms as refugees. And there is deep disquiet all over the country, and yet no sign of it ending. Now, you may think this constitutes something of a joke. Bring back national service. Well, it's not really been heard as a political issue for decades in this country, and yet Penny Mordaunt has floated an idea that maybe we opt all 16-year-olds into a form of national service. It wouldn't have to be military, it could be civil, it could be social, and equally you could opt out of it. But is the concept of a national service a good idea? I rather think it might be. We'll debate it in just a minute.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes, and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio, and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think. Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
No longer is it the joke of the pub bore, bring back national service. No, actually, there is a sensible, practical idea that's been put forward today, and I've not heard it. I've not heard it sensibly put forward in this country, frankly, in my lifetime. Adam Hawksby is Deputy Director of the centre-right think tank Onward. And this report, Adam, and you've had Penny Mordaunt back it, you've had Dan Jarvis, the MP, back it, Rory Stewart, former MP, back it. Are you really going to put every 16-year-old in khaki?
So we are going to give every 16-year-old the opportunity, they can opt out if they want to go through a modern form of national service, which combines civic and voluntary elements, things like social action, with a 2-week residential programs. That might include elements of your traditional military service, kind of outdoor bounds, physical activities.
Yep.
But the real purpose of that 2 weeks is social mixing. There are too few opportunities at the moment for young people to meet others outside of their bubble, outside of their class, outside of the traditional area that they've grew up in. So that's why we want to reintroduce this, to help people build relationships outside of their usual social network, to build skills, to build character, those soft skills, and also to develop a stronger sense of belonging to their community and to their nation.
So why just 2 weeks?
Well, we think the first scheme should be a couple of weeks. I mean, look, logistically, this is enormously challenging. One of the things that inspired us is they just introduced a similar programme in France, the Service National Universel, if you'll excuse my bad French accent.
Wasn't too bad.
And they, what they did 5 years ago, Emmanuel Macron has said, we need this sort of programme, how can we make it work? They said, let's go for conscription, the sort of programme that previously might have been called for. The army said, no thanks. Actually, it's not useful for us to have a bunch of recruits.
I mean, actually, the truth of it is the British Army is now so small that it physically wouldn't have the people at this moment in time to train people and to do military. So this is a completely non-military option.
Yeah.
And it's a couple of weeks of bonding, basically.
Well, it's got 3 phases. So the first week is that couple of weeks of bonding. That's the residential. So that's where people get a feel for it, meet people outside their bubble. Then you have 6 months in which people do a couple of hours a week of social action. So some might do St John's Ambulance, the Special Constabulary. Others might do more local programmes. It's up to that young person, their school, the community. And then the third phase, if people wish to, is to do a year of service. That might be more like the AmeriCorps model, where people do a full year as a gap year.
Yeah. And you're saying 16-year-olds begin this?
Yeah. So it would be alongside school or college. So it would be something that they do in...
And then the year you might do would be at 18 when you finish your A-levels or whatever it may be.
Yeah, it could be. And people might choose to flex this over those 2 years when it's best for them.
Now, there are some schemes that exist already along these lines, but for those you have to opt in.
Yeah.
What you're suggesting is that everyone goes into this unless they choose to opt out.
Yeah, I mean, this might sound very familiar to some people. National Citizen Service was the David Cameron era attempt at this, and their big target...
And let's be frank, it went nowhere.
Well, so its target was 45% participation. It crept up year on year and in the end got to about 15%, which is still a decent chunk of young people, but nowhere near the 80% that we're aiming for. We think about 1 in 5 young people might opt out. But the reason that we've argued for, an NCS on steroids, a much bigger scheme, is because that mass participation, the shared ritual, every young person doing it, is what's so important, because that's how you meet people from different groups. It's not just those that step.
Well, I think you're right. I think, to be honest with you, the biggest divide in Britain now is a class divide. It's a huge class divide. And so the idea that everyone mixes in together, I think, is a very, very good idea. What needs to happen, Adam, to take a concept like this from being an academic paper put out by Onward? How do you make it actually happen in reality?
Yeah, so the first thing you're going to need is a lot of political support. So one of the things we wanted to test here is the amount of public support. And we were actually blown away. So the public, by about 56% to about 19%, support national service.
I get it.
Right.
Yeah, I get
and
it.
young people themselves, actually, this is what I think is misunderstood. So 18 to 25-year-olds in our poll, 3 to 1 supported a national service scheme.
Did they really?
They did. And that was 46% to 17%. They said this is a good idea. And so this is something that young people are after. It's something they want. As long as it's not compulsory military, they're up for it. But what you're going to need is a politician that says, I back this, I support it, I will invest in it. So we calculate it will cost about £1 billion a year. At the moment, the budget for NCS is about 200 million. So that's a significant ramp up. They've got to prioritise it, they've got to invest in it, and they've got to make the case that this is an investment in young people's future.
So you need some support from Labour politicians too, don't you?
We do, but I mean, David Lammy, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, in his book argued for a form of national service. In fact, he argued for a compulsory form because he said, without rights, without obligation, there's no rights. Without obligation, no duty.
No. How long ago was that book written?
It would have been prior to his current appointment to the Shadow Cabinet.
That's my only concern about... Hey, look, I don't know. I hope David Lammy does support it, and I hope this big... I'd love to see this as an issue that actually wasn't considered to be left or right.
Right.
But it was about, people coming together and a feeling that actually there is a shared identity and that the nation and belonging to it and giving to it is important. Well, all I can say, Adam, is I do genuinely wish you well with this. And I'm 100% behind you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, the What the Farage moment. I tell you what, can you believe it? That the European Union, over the course of the last year, have bought 52% of the liquefied natural gas that has been sold by, wait for it, Putin's Russia. Yes, whilst they put sanctions on and talk about supporting Ukraine in the war, they're actually directly funding the Putin regime. It all goes to show they may have laughed, but when Trump said to them at the United Nations, to the Germans in particular, you are becoming way too dependent on Russia, everyone laughed at him. And the Russia conspiracy was that Trump was because of Russia, Brexit was because of Russia, when all the way along it was the European Union that were, and still are, funding them. Now, ULEZ. There are some potential ways around ULEZ. You may well think, according to the rules, that your vehicle is non-compliant. And I said to you last night that I thought logically, when you go for the annual MOT, and every car after 3 years has to, they simply could test emissions. But that clearly is much too simple and perhaps in some ways shows you what Sadiq Khan is really driving at. However, if you wonder why your car, and you wonder whether perhaps unfairly you are being charged £12.50 a day, what you can do is contact your vehicle's customer service. Give them your vehicle details, and they will tell you what Euro standard your vehicle is. Yep, it's all Euro standards. We may have had Brexit, we haven't left this stuff behind, and it's Euro 4 for petrol cars, it's Euro 6 for diesel cars, and that's all to do with the amount of emissions that come out of them. So even though your car may technically be too old, even though under Khan's plan you should be paying £12.50 a day, if your particulates and nitrous oxides emissions aren't too bad, you can get a Euro standard conformity certificate. It's going to cost you 70 quid, maybe 100 quid, whatever it is, but it might save you that money. So please, if you want to try and save yourself what could be a cost of up to £4.5 grand every single year, think about getting in touch with your vehicle's customer services. In a moment, Talking Pints. Sir Gerald Howarth, long-time politician, one-time banker, huge supporter of Britain's military and a renowned right-winger, not somebody particularly shy, not somebody backwards at coming forwards. And he joins me in a moment for Talking Pints.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
It's my favourite part of the show. Well, of course it is. It's Talking Pints, and I'm joined by Sir Gerald Howarth. Gerald, welcome.
Thanks very much, Nigel. Thanks for the glass of vino.
Cheers. Now, Gerald, you've done many things in your life. You've never shied away from controversy, from opinion. But the thing that really worries me most about you is your background as a banker. Bank of America, and I've been doing at war and doing battle with the banking industry. So what's happened to banking?
Well, I left university with a degree in English and 120 hours flying on chipmunks in the University Air Squadron. Didn't really know what I wanted to do, except I didn't want to join the Royal Air Force because I had this great burning political ambition, and I thought that being an officer in the Royal Air Force is not consistent with having a political ambition. And so I didn't know what to do. And a friend of mine had been deputy director of MI6, a guy called George Kennedy Young, himself quite a controversial character. And George was working for Claremont Benson as an advisor. And he suggested that I might go into the city, which I did after having done 2 years running the Society for Individual Freedom. But I always wanted to be a politician, but you can't tell your careers master at school that you like to be a politician because, it's precocious. And there is no route map, as you know yourself. There's absolutely no route map as to how you embark on a political...
And nor should there be.
No, there shouldn't. And I've always said that House of Commons particularly should be the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker. And when you had those swarthy coal miners deep from underground, the last one, of course, on the Conservative benches being Patrick McLaughlin, not that I describe my Lord McLaughlin as swarthy, but great...
Although Lee Anderson, of course, now. Lee Anderson, a former miner, and people with, a varied background as opposed to the sort of career churning out from Oxford.
Right, because they bring some special expertise. I brought a little bit of my experience in banking when we had a Banking Act to try and deal with some of the problems at the time where they wanted to have managers approved by the government. I said, that's mad. All you're doing is handing responsibility to the government, taking it away from people who are responsible, who are the board of directors of the bank. But as to your point, of course, my line was when people said that, I see you're a banker, I said, I used to be an international banker. I'm now going straight. I'm a politician.
Yeah, both are pretty unpopular, and certainly with me. Did you enjoy working in the city, though?
Not particularly, no. I mean, I had a young family, and it was a means of financing my life. But I had this burning ambition to be a politician.
Yeah.
People ask me why, because it's very corny, but I just love my country, and I wanted to do.
Yeah, and
I wanted to campaign against socialism.
You've always been very consistent with this, haven't you? You've been against socialism. You've been concerned about open-door immigration. You've been worried about culture, about what's happening to British culture.
I think it's appalling what's going on at the moment. Absolutely appalling. And I do urge the Prime Minister, if he's watching the shows, I'm sure he does, Nigel, because you're extremely popular. But if the Prime Minister is watching, I would urge him to get his government to do much more about dealing with this wokery. And I had an email from the local chief executive of the local authority, because I'm chairman of Mitle Village in Suffolk, and telling me about the local elections, how they've gone. It signed his name. I think it's Arthur somebody or other. He, bracket, he stroke him. What are you doing? I'm extremely offended. And he said, well, one of my councillors has come out as trans, so I'm showing solidarity. I said, goodness sake, this is an utter absurdity.
Yeah.
And when a teacher is reprimanded because a child has said something about it, criticised another child for identifying as a cat, for God's sake, what on earth are we doing now?
Yeah, and a teacher might lose their job over this.
Absolutely, and that's one of the reasons why I speak out.
Yeah.
Because the Metropolitan Police Service, I thought it was a force, but apparently it's a service, if they're watching. I speak out because I wanted to protect other people. I had a woman come to my surgery, worked in the NHS, and she was absolutely mortified. She was in tears. She had a black female boss who was giving her a really hard time. She said, Sir Gerald, I've done my level best to do everything she asked, and I'm still getting grief. And this woman should have been, this lady constituent of mine should have been able to have gone to a manager and said, I'm being treated badly, but couldn't do so because her immediate boss was black.
Yeah, I mean, some of this stuff is crackers. I mean, Gerald, you've been, as I say, very consistent over decades in what you believed in. As somebody who got into Parliament, you spent a long time in Parliament, a short gap in the middle of it all, but a long...
I was a retread.
Yeah, but that's very common, you know.
But I won't forget the people of Cannock and Burntwood.
Yeah, your first constituency.
Who elected me, a pinstripe-suited banker, in a mining constituency in 1983. So if anybody in Cannock and Burntwood is watching, you gave me the privilege of...
And how interesting, if you fast forward that to 2014, 15, 16... when I was campaigning in Canada on Brexit, they were right there. Yeah, they were right. No question about it.
Sound people in the Midlands.
Now, you got absolutely tucked up, didn't you? You and Neil Hamilton.
Yes.
The famous panorama. I mean, I know all about being stitched up in newspapers and programmes, but this was a big one, wasn't it, what happened to you?
Yes, we just arrived in Parliament in 1983, and there was the Panorama did a programme called Maggie's Militant Tendency, suggesting that a number of Tory MPs, about 6 of us, were basically in cahoots with the extreme right, and there was a bridge to this extreme right. Well, the other 4 were established parliamentarians, and everybody in the parliamentary party just laughed it off. Absolutely ridiculous. But Neil and I were brand new.
Yeah.
And we saw that our careers were just going to be destroyed, so we decided to litigate and to fight a libel action. We had the support of Sir James Goldsmith, Jimmy Goldsmith, great man, and Jimmy Gulliver of Distillers. But we'd have lost everything. And I did about a couple of months before the case actually went to court, and took 2.5 years to go to court in 1986. But I did send a letter to the Deputy Director of the BBC saying, understand, if we lose everything. And if you lose, understand, you're going to lose everything as well. And, of course, the Director General, Alistair Milne, was fired by Duke Hussey, the incoming chairman of the BBC.
It was a massive scandal of its day, wasn't it?
It was an appalling scandal.
Yeah.
And it was demonstrative of the culture in the BBC. I mean, one of the interesting things, I don't think many people know this, but one of the interesting things that we have the uncut tapes, incidentally. Neil and I have the uncut tapes, and it makes Goebbels look like an amateur. Yeah. And the chairman of the Young Conservatives, they'd done a report, some sort of similar report on entryism, and the chairman had been interviewed on the programme, and he was asked, what about Howard's mother? My mother set up something called the Immigration Control Association. She was a front runner in the campaign to alert the British public to the dangers of mass immigration. And so the interviewer said to him, what about Howard's mother? He said, well, I'd rather not talk about that. It's not right. Oh, no. And he was goaded into denouncing me because of my mother.
Yeah, and
that's the BBC.
And any association with Enoch Powell, who was considered to be bedeviled by them, and all the rest of it. But you've had a long career in politics. But what interests me is from 2002 to 2010, there you were, shadow defence. And your parents, both RAF, yourself, a keen pilot, and your clear passion for defence of the realm, the British forces, has always come through your parliamentary career. We've had 13 years, Gerald, 13 years of a Conservative government that have slashed all 3 services in the most astonishing way, haven't they?
Yes, but let me explain as briefly as I can, as you will permit me. We came into government in 2010 inheriting a budget deficit of £165 billion. We had to do something about it. I knew it was bad in the Ministry of Defence because I had people who were telling me, quite senior officers were telling me, perfectly legitimately, they weren't divulging state secrets, but they were telling me it was bad. So we knew we were going to inherit a bad situation. Don't forget the Carrier programme was delayed by 9 months, cost £600 million simply to delay the programme under Labour. But we came in with that.
But Gerald, that's a long time ago.
It is a long time ago, but
we're still cutting.
And we're still cutting, although the budget has gone up by 24 billion. But we've given a lot of kit away to the Ukrainians, quite rightly so too. But we have an imperative to rebuild our stocks. Now, my son-in-law, James Cartledge, happens to be the Minister for Defence Procurement, the job that I shadowed for 6 years. He is doing that. And I know that he, although not a background in defence, he is working day and night trying to deal with these procurement problems. Part of the problem is you're dealing with the cutting edge of technology. If you don't have cutting edge of technology, you're going to be beaten by your opponent.
Yeah, so it's not just manpower.
It's not just manpower.
No, and I get that, and I understand that, and I do get that. Grant Shapps appointed today, career politician. He's not going to have the same passion for this as the outgoing Defence Secretary.
Well, of course, when he was standing for the leadership of the party last year, he did make it clear that he believed that defence spending should be increased to 3% of gross domestic product. It's just over 2%.
What would it do if Howarth was in charge? What would
as my son-in-law told me, he said, Gerald, you probably think it ought to be 7%. I said, that's a good starting point, James. But that is what we... one interesting point of the many interesting points that Ben Wallace made was that by the end of this decade, we could really be into a hot war because we have allowed people like Putin to get away with impunity. And if we're in a hot war, we are going to need men, women, and we're going to need kit. And we're going to need it fast.
And let alone...
the imperative now, I hope that Grant Shapps, whom I know extremely well, is a great guy, he's a fellow pilot, I hope that Grant will stick by what he said last year. He wants to see defence spending at 3% of GDP.
Well, I hope it is, Gerald, too, because, I mean, actually, you talk about Putin, but, I fear China more. And I want to say this to you.
I share that.
Outside of politics, congratulations on 50 years of marriage.
Nigel, how did you know that?
Well, there you are. So she must be very long-suffering, is all I can say.
Well, I couldn't have done it without Lizzie. There's no two ways about that. And also, she didn't marry a politician. She married a banker, and here we are. No, I'm very, very fortunate indeed. I've got a fantastic wife who's stuck by me through thick and thin, not least through that ghastly panorama business.
Well, I think on that note, we'll say cheers to her, and thank you to you.
To Lizzie.
For joining us.
Thank you very much.
Lizzie.
Nigel.
Thank you. Well, there we are. Now, Jacob Rees-Mogg is up next with his State of the Nation programme. And I wonder what Jacob is going to talk about this evening. Jacob.
We're talking about drugs because the Home Affairs Committee has come out with a report. And the question is, do we just have a complete confusion that it's meant to be illegal, but actually anyone who seems to want to take drugs can? And what are we going to do about it? Can we actually have a sensible, proper drugs policy?
Well, I have to say, the name Jacob Rees-Mogg and drugs, I've never sort of put them together, particularly in the past. But you're right, because if we do this, if we allow people to take illegal drugs in a semi-legal environment, where are we? It's a complete and utter mess. All of that coming up in just a moment. I'm done for the week. I'm back with you next Monday evening at 7 o'clock. But let's have a look at what the weekend weather has in store for us.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Bit of a mishmash tomorrow, a misty, murky start. Some places will see a few showers, but some spots will see some warm sunshine too. It's a messy situation because we've got an old area of low pressure hanging around, and these weather fronts have been bringing cloud and rain across many areas through the day. The possibility of one or two heavy showers just in the far southeast through the night, staying fairly damp and murky and misty over parts of northern England, and some of that light rain trickling into southern Scotland as well. Northern Scotland staying dry and clear and quite chilly. Temperatures well down into single figures. Further south, a pretty mild night. Temperatures holding up in the mid-teens for some. Into Friday, as I said, a bit of a mishmash. The Midlands, northern England, parts of southern Scotland, fairly drab for much of the day, actually overcast.
Pretty cloudy too for Northern Ireland. Some light rain and drizzle here and there, especially to the east of the Pennines. Further south, something a bit brighter, sunny spells, but there will also be a sprinkling of showers, mostly dry over northern Scotland. 20 degrees.